Who in the world is answering my phone at midnight? Chase Whitmore bolted upright in his darkened penthouse wineglass, forgotten as a stranger's voice flowed through his speakers in perfect Chinese calm, confident and completely impossible. 12 miles away, Simone Monroe knelt beside a ringing phone on the 14th floor of Whitmore Technologies, her heart hammering as she whispered words in a language she'd hidden for 3 years. For 3 years, she'd perfected the art of invisibility, head-down movements, efficient voice never raised above a whisper. The mahogany doors of the executive suite towered before her like monuments to worlds she'd never belonged to, each nameplate a reminder of her place in the hierarchy. She paused outside Chase Whitmore's corner office, noting the family photo on his desk. A beautiful woman with kind eyes who seemed to understand something about loneliness that Simone recognized. The CEO's wife had died 3 years ago, according to office whispers, leaving him as isolated in his penthouse as Simone was in her studio apartment. Then the phone rang. Not the gentle chime of reception, but the urgent, piercing shriek of the CEO's direct international line. The sound cut through the silence like a scream, each ring more desperate than the last. Simone's mop handle trembled in her grip as she counted 10 rings, 15, 20. She glanced toward the security desk, empty. Henry was making his rounds on the lower floors. The elevator panel glowed red. All executives had fled to their suburban kingdoms hours ago. Just her, the shadows, and this relentless cry for help echoing off empty walls like a prayer without an answer. Against every rule she'd learned about staying invisible, Simone approached the phone. Her reflection in the black screen looked small and uncertain. A woman who'd learned that speaking up usually meant getting hurt. But something in that desperate ringing called to a part of her she'd buried deep beneath years of disappointment. On the 23rd ring, she lifted the receiver to her ear. "Hello," she whispered in Mandarin, the syllables flowing like water after 3 years of drought. The response exploded through the line, panicked rapid-fire Chinese that transported her back to quiet afternoons, with her stepmother patient lessons over jasmine tea before cancer stole her voice away. "Please someone help us. We need confirmation of the final contract terms immediately. If it isn't sent in the next 18 minutes, the Shanghai office will close and cancel everything. 3 months of negotiations will be destroyed." 12 miles away, in a darkened penthouse overlooking the glittering city, Chase Whitmore sat motionless in his leather chair, another sleepless night stretching before him. The international conference call he'd forgotten was still connected, and through his speakers came a voice that made him freeze, impossibly calm. Steady as still water, speaking perfect Mandarin with the kind of patience he hadn't heard since Elena died. But this wasn't the voice of any employee he knew. This voice carried something he'd forgotten existed, genuine compassion. "Don't worry," Simone said softly, her words wrapping around the caller's panic like a warm blanket. "Take a deep breath. I'm here now. We'll solve this together. Can you tell me your access code for the backup server?" Chase bolted upright wineglass forgotten. "Who in the world is that answering my phone?" What happens when the most important voice in the building belongs to someone everyone trained themselves not to see? Simone Monroe had learned at 28 that brilliance meant nothing without the right packaging. She possessed a linguistics degree that gathered dust in her closet, spoke 4 languages fluently, and could analyze classical Chinese poetry that made professors weep. But none of that mattered when medical debt from her stepmother's cancer treatment had left her choosing between rent and recognition. Her stepmother, Li Wei, had been more than a parent. She'd been a bridge between worlds. For 10 years, Li Wei had taught Simone not just Mandarin vocabulary, but the heart of Chinese culture, the subtle art of speaking with respect and warmth. "Language is not just words, my dear child," Li Wei would say during their Sunday lessons. It is how we touch another person's soul. When Li Wei died, Simone felt like she'd lost her translator to life itself. She'd applied for 73 positions after college marketing firms, translation services, international corporations. 73 rejection letters had arrived at her tiny studio apartment, each one teaching her that qualifications mattered less than confidence, that brilliance was worthless if it came wrapped in uncertainty and second-hand interview clothes. The night cleaning position at Whitmore Technologies had required no interview, no explanation of why a woman who could navigate complex international contracts was scrubbing toilets at midnight. Just show up, work hard, stay silent. She'd mastered all three requirements with the dedication of someone who understood that survival sometimes meant swallowing pride. Henry Miles, the 66-year-old night security guard, had been the first person in 3 years to ask her real questions. Silver-haired with laugh lines earned through 4 decades of believing in people's hidden potential, he treated Simone like the granddaughter he'd never had. During their quiet conversations in empty hallways, she'd shared fragments of her past. Li Wei's patient lessons, the poetry books they'd studied together, the dreams that had died with her stepmother's voice. Languages don't forget, sweetheart, Henry would say, watching her dust picture frames of executives who lived in different universes. They just hibernate until the right moment wakes them up. But Simone had learned that voices like hers, uncertain, marked by discount stores and night shifts, weren't welcome in boardrooms where million-dollar decisions got made by people who'd never worried about choosing between groceries and textbooks. Brooke Carter commanded the 14th floor with the authority of someone who'd never questioned her right to occupy important spaces. As head receptionist and unofficial gatekeeper, she controlled access to Chase Whitmore like a dragon protecting treasure, her designer suits and salon-perfect hair serving as armor against anyone she deemed inferior. For 2 years, she'd harbored a secret obsession with Chase, crafting elaborate fantasies where her efficiency and unwavering devotion would make him see her as more than just another employee. Every ignored greeting, every meeting where he looked through her instead of at her, fed a growing resentment that needed somewhere to land. The night cleaning staff provided perfect targets for her frustration. Some people need constant reminders about their place in the world, Brooke had whispered to her assistant after discovering Simone reading Chinese poetry during a 15-minute break. This is a technology company, not a cultural center. People should focus on their actual jobs. Chase Whitmore had built his software empire on the precision of language, clean code, clear communication contracts that left nothing to interpretation. But he'd stopped believing in words' power to heal 3 years ago, when teams of doctors couldn't find better ones to save his wife, Elena. Elena had been a professional translator before their marriage, fluent in 6 languages and passionate about building bridges between cultures. The most important conversations happen in the spaces between languages, she'd told him during their honeymoon in Barcelona. That's where people have to trust each other enough to really connect. On their last night together, as machines beeped their electronic prayers around her hospital bed, Elena had whispered something in Spanish, the language of her childhood in Mexico. Chase had held her hand and felt her slip away in syllables he couldn't follow, words that might have been goodbye, or I love you, or please don't forget me. Please don't. Your voice is enough to keep me here, she'd said earlier that evening, her fingers pressed against his chest. Promise me you'll remember that voices matter, Chase. Even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones. But grief had made him forget everything except the sound of machines that couldn't save the one voice that mattered most. Now at 35, he moved through his company like a man viewing life through bulletproof glass, making decisions that affected thousands, while feeling nothing for anyone's success, serving as a fortress against any emotion that might crack his carefully constructed defenses. But tonight, listening to that mysterious voice guide a panicked stranger through crisis with infinite patience, something shifted in the ice around his heart. This wasn't corporate efficiency or professional courtesy. This was someone who genuinely cared about another human being's distress. The voice reminded him of Elena. The next morning, Chase played the recording 23 times before his first meeting. Each listen revealed new layers, education disguised as humility, strength wrapped in gentleness, fluency born from love rather than mere academic study. Whoever she was, she'd saved $1 million partnership with grace that his highest-paid executives couldn't match even on their best days. The recording had captured not just her words, but her tone, the way she'd slowed her speech when the caller panicked, how she'd used encouraging phrases that weren't in any business manual. The genuine warmth that had transformed a potential catastrophe into a moment of human connection. "Find her," he told Brooke, his eyes holding an intensity that made her pulse quicken with hope and inexplicable dread. "The woman who answered last night. I need to meet her immediately." Brooke's professional smile never wavered, but something cold settled deep in her stomach. She'd heard whispers from the night staff about the cleaning woman who hummed foreign songs while working, who read books with strange characters during her breaks, who spoke multiple languages despite pushing a mop for minimum wage. If that pathetic, invisible creature had somehow captured Chase's attention in a way that 2 years of Brooke's perfect performance hadn't. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. I'll handle this personally and discreetly." The hunt was about to begin, not for a person, but for a voice that had awakened something everyone thought was permanently asleep. What happens when powerful people start searching for someone who's spent years perfecting the art of not being found? Chase replayed the recording until he could hear every inflection, every careful pause where the mysterious woman had allowed silence to create space for the caller's fear to settle. Her Mandarin flowed like poetry, but more importantly, it flowed like compassion. Each syllable had been chosen not just for accuracy, but for comfort. He sat in his office studying the waveform patterns on his computer screen, as if they could reveal the speaker's identity. This wasn't just language proficiency. This was someone who understood that communication was about healing, not just information transfer. "Play it one more time," he commanded his technical assistant Tom. 3 floors below, Brooke's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her morning coffee as fragments of the recording drifted through Chase's open door. Her stomach dropped as recognition dawned. She'd heard that voice before, humming softly in empty hallways during late nights when she'd stayed to finish reports that might impress the boss. The cleaning woman, the nobody with her discount clothes and timid demeanor. Somehow she'd gotten Chase's attention in a way that Brooke's 2 years of strategic devotion never had. Meanwhile, in the cramped employee break room, Simone sat surrounded by 17 crumpled papers, each one a failed attempt at a resignation letter. Her hands shook as she tried to find words for the terror that had kept her awake all night. She'd crossed a line, broken rules, stepped outside the invisible boundaries that kept people like her safe from people like them. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and the vending machine hummed its mechanical song sounds of a world where she belonged, where expectations were simple and consequences were predictable. But last night, for 18 minutes, she'd existed in a different universe. She'd been someone who mattered. Henry found her there, his silver head bent with grandfatherly concern over the evidence of her turmoil. "What's got you so twisted up, honey?" "I did something terrible last night," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the building's mechanical breathing. "I answered a phone that wasn't mine to answer. I spoke when I should have stayed invisible." Henry's weathered hands smoothed one of the discarded letters, reading her careful script. The handwriting of someone who'd been taught that presentation mattered even when the content would be dismissed. "Don't stay silent forever, sweetheart," he said gently. "Last night, for the first time in 3 years, I saw you being yourself. Myself isn't enough for people like them. Myself is dangerous. People like them need people like you more than they realize." Henry's eyes crinkled with something that might have been pride mixed with protective worry. "The voice you used last night, that was the voice you were always meant to have. Don't let fear steal it back." But as Simone walked toward the executive elevator resignation letter clutched in her trembling hand, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was about to cross another line. This one leading straight into the kind of trouble that destroyed lives like hers. The executive floor felt alien in daylight, busier, charged with the energy of people who moved through the world, assuming they belonged everywhere they went. Simone kept her head down, studying carpet patterns that probably cost more than her monthly rent, making her way toward Chase's office like a condemned prisoner approaching the gallows. She'd slip the letter under his door and disappear back into the safety of invisibility before anyone noticed the cleaning woman had dared to venture into executive territory during business hours. But Brooke was watching from behind her reception desk phone, already in hand, smile sharp as a scalpel. She'd been waiting for this moment, the perfect opportunity to remind everyone exactly where certain people belonged. Simone's resignation letter slipped through the crack under Chase's door, and she felt something fundamental break in her chest. Relief mixed with profound loss, the end of a dream she'd never admitted to having. But as she turned to leave, her elbow caught the edge of an expensive plant stand. The crash echoed through the marble hallway like thunder in a cathedral, and suddenly faces appeared in doorways, faces she'd cleaned around for years, but never really seen in the harsh light of their judgment. "Oh, how clumsy," someone muttered with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never worried about job security. "Cleaning staff shouldn't be on this floor during business hours," said another voice, already reaching for a phone to report the violation. Simone dropped to her knees on the polished stone, gathering broken pottery, with fingers that began bleeding immediately, each shard a piece of her dignity scattered for everyone to see. The familiar heat of shame burned her cheeks as expensive shoes stepped carefully around her. Their owners, too, practiced at ignoring what they didn't want to acknowledge. From her strategic position behind the reception desk, Brooke smiled with satisfaction. She'd already photographed the resignation letter through the glass door, already crafted the story she'd tell HR about unauthorized access and suspicious behavior. The seeds were planted. Now she just needed to water them with carefully chosen words about security breaches and inappropriate conduct. But inside his office, Chase Whitmore was reading a resignation letter, written in the most beautiful handwriting he'd ever seen, careful, thoughtful strokes that revealed a soul that cared about getting every detail exactly right. The letter itself was a masterpiece of professional courtesy, apologizing for overstepping boundaries and expressing gratitude for opportunities she'd never actually been given. This was the handwriting of someone who'd been taught to value precision, someone who understood that presentation mattered, even when the content would likely be ignored. This was the work of someone who cared deeply about doing things correctly, even when saying goodbye. And suddenly, Chase knew exactly whose voice had saved his most important business relationship. The question was, would he be brave enough to admit that the most valuable person in his company was someone he'd never bothered to notice? The walk to the executive conference room felt like a journey toward execution. Simone's resignation letter had been submitted. There was no retreating from what she'd set in motion. But as she approached the mahogany doors that had intimidated her for 3 years, she saw Chase Whitmore standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette outlined against the city he'd conquered, but somehow seemed separated from. When he turned his eyes, held something she'd never expected. Not anger or dismissal, but a gentleness that made her throat constrict with unexpected emotion. "Simone Monroe," he said quietly, her name carrying weight in his voice as if he was testing how it felt to actually say it. "That is your name, isn't it?" She nodded, afraid that speaking might shatter whatever strange spell had brought her to this moment. 3 years you've worked here. 3 years, and I never—" He shook his head, something resembling shame flickering across his features. "I should have learned your name on your first day. That's my failure, not yours." The apology hit her like a physical force. In her world, executives didn't apologize to cleaning staff. They barely acknowledged their existence. "Was it you?" he asked. The other night on the international line, every survival instinct screamed at her to deny it, to disappear back into the safety of being nobody special. The lie formed on her lips, familiar and protective as old armor. "No," she whispered, the word falling like a stone into the space between them. "I don't know what you mean." Chase froze, doubt creeping across his face like winter shadow. For a moment he questioned everything, the voice that had reminded him of Elena's warmth, the connection he'd felt across miles of telephone wire, the certainty that had driven him to search for someone who might not exist. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "I thought—" The voice was so distinctive, so— He trailed off, looking suddenly foolish. "I must have been mistaken." But before Simone could escape back to her safe, small world, the conference room door burst open with the force of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. Brooke strode in with an armload of HR documentation and a righteousness that made the air crackle with dangerous electricity. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass, her eyes bright, with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver justice. "Mr. Whitmore, I apologize for interrupting, but this absolutely cannot wait." Brooke's voice carried the authority of someone who'd never doubted her right to be heard. "We have a serious security breach that requires immediate attention." She spread photographs across the conference table like evidence at a criminal trial. Simone's resignation letter captured through the glass door, time-stamped images of her in restricted areas, angles carefully cropped to suggest guilt where there had only been fear. This individual, Brooke continued gesturing at Simone as if she were contaminated evidence, has been systematically violating our security protocols, using her cleaning access to infiltrate executive areas, photographing confidential documents, potentially stealing proprietary information for unknown purposes. Each accusation hit Simone like a physical blow. The words transformed her quiet act of courage into something criminal and dark, infiltrating, photographing, stealing, violating. In Brooke's narrative, Simone became a threat instead of someone who'd simply tried to help. "That's not I would never," but Simone's voice was too small, too uncertain to fight against Brooke's polished confidence and prepared presentation. For a terrible moment, she saw doubt return to Chase's eyes, and her heart cracked a little more. Of course, he'd believed the articulate woman in designer clothes over the night janitor who'd just lied to his face about the phone call. Brooke was building her case methodically. "I've also discovered evidence of unauthorized computer access. She somehow obtained Mr. Zhou's direct contact information, which is classified at Level 7 security clearance. There's no legitimate way she could have acquired that data." The accusation was brilliantly constructed and completely false. Simone had never accessed any computer systems. She'd simply answered a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. But in Brooke's version, even that innocent act became evidence of sophisticated corporate espionage. Then Chase's phone buzzed with an international call, Wei calling from Shanghai with the 8-hour time difference that made this his afternoon check-in. Mr. Whitmore? Joe's voice filled the room through the speaker, urgent and concerned. I must discuss yesterday's contract translation emergency. The version your head receptionist provided this morning contains serious errors that could have bankrupted both our companies. The terminology is completely wrong, the cultural context is missing entirely, and the legal implications are catastrophic. The silence in the room became suffocating. Brooke's face cycled through white, then red, then a sickly yellow as her carefully constructed narrative began collapsing around her. What translation? Chase's voice carried the dangerous quiet of someone whose patience had just evaporated. The truth unraveled quickly. Brooke had approached Wei that morning, presenting herself as the company's expert translator and cultural liaison. She'd provided contract modifications that served her own agenda while subtly sabotaging the very partnership she claimed to protect, hoping to position herself as indispensable, while eliminating any competition for Chase's attention. I was only trying to help the company. Brooke stammered, but her words rang hollow against the weight of evidence. How could you possibly trust a cleaning woman over someone with my qualifications and experience? Joe's voice cut through her excuses like a blade. The cleaning woman, as you dismiss her, demonstrated more understanding of our cultural values and business needs in 5 minutes than most professional translators manage in entire careers. Her voice carried something your translation completely lacked: sincerity and genuine respect. Chase looked from Brooke to Simone, seeing clearly for the first time in 3 years. The woman who'd been invisible was the one who'd saved everything, while the woman who'd demanded constant recognition had nearly destroyed it all through jealousy and deception. Brooke, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd finally remembered how to lead with both intellect and integrity. Security will escort you from the building. Your access is revoked effective immediately. As Brooke left her designer heels clicking like a countdown to consequences she'd never imagined facing, Simone found herself alone with a man who was looking at her, really seeing her for the first time. Now, Chase said quietly, his voice gentle but determined. Let me ask you again, and I need you to trust me enough to tell the truth. Was it you on that call? What happens when a woman who's learned to hide finally meets someone worthy of her honesty? The conference room felt transformed, now smaller. More human, charged with the possibility of truth instead of performance. Chase had closed the door, drawn, the blinds created a space where honesty could exist without judgment or fear. Yes. Simone whispered the word, barely audible but carrying the weight of 3 years of silence. It was me. Why didn't you tell me when I first asked? Her hands twisted in her lap, years of invisibility warring with this unprecedented moment of being truly seen. Because people like me don't get to be heroes in stories like this. We're supposed to clean up after the heroes, not become them. People like you. Invisible people. Quiet people. People who work while important people sleep, so they don't have to see us during their important days. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, months of suppressed thoughts finally finding their escape route. And I learned early that the safest place for someone like me is in the background, where mistakes can't hurt anyone who matters. Chase moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the cityscape he commanded, but had somehow become disconnected from. My wife Elena used to work as a professional translator before we married. She always said that the most important conversations happen in the spaces between languages, where people have to trust each other enough to build bridges across differences. He turned back to Simone, and she saw grief there, old grief, the kind that changes shape over time but never completely heals. Elena died speaking Spanish using words from her childhood in Mexico. I held her hand and felt her slip away in syllables I couldn't follow. Afterward, I hired 5 professional translators desperate to understand her final words. They all gave me different interpretations: technical, clinical, emotionally sterile. His voice caught slightly. None of them captured what I heard in her voice that night, the love that didn't need perfect translation. What do you think she was trying to say? That love transcends language barriers. That connection happens heart to heart, not just word to word. Chase sat across from her, the massive executive desk, no longer serving as a barrier between their worlds. When I heard you on that call, guiding Joe through his panic, with such infinite patience and genuine care, it was the first time in 3 years I remembered what Elena meant. You gave me back something I thought was permanently lost. I just wanted to help someone who sounded scared, Simone said simply. I know. And that instinct, that immediate compassion for a stranger's distress, is exactly why I need you to help me transform how this company connects with people. Chase pulled out an official contract, his eyes never leaving her face. International Communications Director, your office will be on this floor, with a view of the city. You're going to help us serve better. Your job will be ensuring that when people reach out to us in crisis, they find someone who understands that language is about human connection, not just information transfer. Simone stared at the documents, afraid to touch them, afraid they might evaporate if she breathed too hard. The salary figure made her dizzy, more money than she'd imagined earning in 5 years of night shifts. I don't have an MBA from an impressive university. I don't have the right wardrobe or the right social connections or... You have something more valuable than any of that, Chase interrupted gently. You have genuine empathy and the ability to make people feel heard when they're afraid. Elena used to say that you can teach someone vocabulary and grammar, but you cannot teach them how to truly care about another person's well-being. You already possess what matters most. As she signed her name on documents that would change everything, Simone thought about Li Wei's patient lessons, about Henry's unwavering belief in her hidden potential, about the frightened voice on the phone that had called out to something brave she'd forgotten she possessed. There's one more thing, Chase said as she finished signing. I want you to develop a program for employees whose talents have been overlooked because of language barriers, economic circumstances, or simple invisibility. People like you who have valuable contributions to make if someone just takes time to listen. What would we call it? I was thinking. Voice within. A place where every person's unique perspective finds recognition and respect. Simone felt tears threatening for the first time in months, not tears of frustration or disappointment, but tears of possibility. I accept. All of it. Thank you, Chase said quietly. For answering a call that wasn't meant for you, for caring about a stranger's distress, and for reminding me that the most important voices are often the ones we almost miss. Through the window, the city spread below them, millions of people living their own invisible lives. Some of them probably answering phones they weren't supposed to answer, probably wondering if their quiet voices could ever matter in a world that seemed designed for louder, more confident people. Today, at least one of those voices had been heard. 6 months later, the third-floor conference room hummed with quiet energy that felt like hope made audible. Afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that sparkled, cleaned not by Simone anymore, but by a professional crew that knew her story and worked with dignity, because someone who'd walked their difficult path now walked confidently with executives. The circular table eliminated hierarchy, creating space where everyone's voice carried equal weight. 4 women sat with Simone, each carrying dreams that had been dismissed, because of accents, origins, or circumstances beyond their control. Maria, who cleaned office buildings at night, but held a teaching degree from Guatemala and dreamed of helping immigrant children navigate American schools. Asha, whose brilliant engineering mind was trapped behind a breakfast cart because her accent made customers doubt her capabilities. Lynn, whose beautiful poetry in Cantonese had never found English words that captured its music. Sarah, whose accounting expertise was dismissed because numbers somehow sounded foreign when spoken with her Syrian accent. "The most important thing to remember," Simone said softly, her voice now carrying the confidence that comes from being truly heard and valued, "is that your voice doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. It just needs your courage to speak your truth." She stood at the whiteboard writing in careful script, "Voice within, where every language finds its home and every story matters." Through the glass wall, Henry watched with eyes bright with grandfatherly pride. At 66, he'd witnessed enough workplace transformations to recognize the genuinely miraculous. Watching Simone evolve from invisible to indispensable had reminded him why he'd spent 4 decades believing in people's hidden potential, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Chase appeared beside him, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a Thursday afternoon ritual they'd developed during these empowerment sessions. "She's revolutionized our entire corporate culture," Chase said quietly. "Applications from multilingual candidates have increased by 400%. Customer satisfaction in international markets has reached record highs. But more importantly," he paused, watching Simone help Lynn work through pronunciation exercises with infinite patience. "She's reminded everyone in this building that being seen and valued is a basic human right, not a privilege you have to earn through luck or connections." Henry sipped his coffee, savoring both the warmth and this moment of witnessing transformation. "You know what she told me last week? She said sometimes the answer isn't finding your voice, it's discovering it was always there, just waiting for someone willing to listen without judgment." Inside the room, Simone was asking each woman to share one word in their native language that represented their truest, most authentic self, the person they were when they stopped trying to squeeze into someone else's narrow expectations. "Esperanza," Maria said with growing confidence. "Hope that never dies." "Himmat." Asha followed her shoulders, straightening. "Courage that builds with practice." "Guangji," Lynn whispered, then repeated more loudly. "Light that guides others home." "Sawab." Sarah smiled broadly. "Rightness that comes from following your heart." When Simone's turn came, she closed her eyes briefly, remembering Li Wei's gentle voice teaching her the word that had lived quietly in her heart for years, waiting for this perfect moment. "Jia," she said finally, the syllable carrying love and belonging. "Home. Because I've learned that home isn't just a geographic location. It's what happens when you find people who hear your voice and understand that it adds something beautiful and necessary to the world." The women wrote their chosen words on small cards, creating a constellation of languages that represented everything their workplace had been missing before someone decided that diversity of thought required diversity of voices. They would tape these cards to their computer monitors, carry them in their wallets, use them as daily reminders that they belonged to something larger and more beautiful than themselves. As the session ended and the women gathered their materials, chattering in a natural mixture of languages that somehow made perfect sense together, Chase realized he was witnessing something Elena would have absolutely loved. She'd always believed that the most beautiful conversations happened when people felt safe enough to be completely authentically themselves. Henry murmured to Chase, "Sometimes all it takes is one person truly hearing your voice, and suddenly you're no longer invisible to anyone, including yourself." Simone Monroe discovered that the most terrifying conversations are often the most necessary ones.